Survivors from last year's Parkland school shooting in Florida were here in San Diego over the weekend. They were in La Jolla. The pair opened up about gun violence and also the importance of getting young people out to vote, getting them registered to vote. This was happening at the JCC in La Jolla yesterday. They also teamed up with March for Our Lives to promote the new book. The book's called The Glimmer of Hope, and in that book you saw right there a moment ago, they talk about the shooting and how it changed their lives forever.
After that happened, it changed everything for me. It changed my outlook on what I wanted to do and what was important to me and what I valued and what I wanted to see come out of my career and my future.
And the students said, along with gun control, we mentioned this briefly, one of their top priorities is getting kids out to register to vote as soon as they're eligible so they can make their voices heard.
Two students who survived last year's deadly school shooting in Parkland, Florida, are speaking with a group in La Jolla tonight.
Let's go ahead and show you a live look now at the event. Sofie Whitney and Brendan Duff are talking about the book they co-wrote titled Glimmer of Hope. It's actually a series of essays chronicling the launch of the March for Our Lives movement. Their visit to San Diego is part of a national tour to discuss the movement, connect with youth and other mass shooting survivors, and also to promote voter registration.
Well, victims of the Parkland High School shooting last year made a stop right here in San Diego to spread a message against gun violence. Two students affected by the shooting spoke in La Jolla last night as part of their nationwide push to stop mass shootings. They shared their terrifying experience and spoke on how the shooting has changed them. The guests also spoke on the recent mass shootings in Virginia Beach that just happened Friday.
It's horrifying and it's triggering and it's emotional, but at the same time, it's something that reminds all of us why we need to act with the urgency that this issue deserves.
They, along with 23 other Parkland school shooting survivors, are part of a movement called March for Our Lives, combating the normalization of gun violence. They also help young people register to vote and urge them to pick politicians who are in favor of stricter gun control laws.
Two survivors from the Parkland shooting out in Florida made a stop right here in San Diego. KUSI's John Soderman spoke to them about how they have taken their experience and turned it into a movement to fight against gun violence.
Why we need to act with the urgency that this issue deserves.
And that issue, according to Parkland school shooting survivor Brendan Duff, is the problem of mass shootings in America. Duff is in La Jolla this night, along with another survivor of the shooting, Sofie Whitney, to talk about how the worst high school shooting in American history changed their lives. In February of last year, a 19-year-old expelled student armed with an AR-15 rifle walked into Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida, and killed 17 students and staff members and wounded 17 others.
And while the worst high school shooting in American history obviously tore the hearts out of the Parkland community, it also did something else.
It galvanized the high school student body in a call to action, a call to do whatever it takes to end the problem of gun violence in America, resulting in a student-led movement called March for Our Lives.
It's a uniquely American problem. This is America's 150th mass shooting when we have about 153 days into the year. So we need to remind ourselves that this is a uniquely American problem. This isn't happening in every country around the world. There isn't just a recent surge of this all over the world. There's a recent surge in America. And there can be a lot of different reasons and a lot of different fingers that we can point, but I think we just need to collectively remind ourselves that this is a uniquely American problem, so we need to address this as Americans, not as one side of the political spectrum or the other.
It was awful. Like, it was just like, it was my worst nightmare. It was everyone's worst nightmare, and I was lucky enough to not only survive, but not to lose many people close to me, and it was unfair that so many people had experienced such loss and so many people had to experience such trauma, and that it wasn't abnormal and that it was going to happen again, and the fact that there was nothing being done about it was just like absurd to us. So we knew that there was something that we had to do, and we needed to create some sort of positive change after something.
In fact, weeks after the Parkland shooting, the first March for Our Lives rally to end gun violence will go down in history as one of the largest protests in American history. John Soderman, KUSI News.
Survivors of the Parkland school shooting make a stop right here in San Diego.
Fox 5's Justina Myers was there as they pushed for an end to gun violence.
Applause filling the Lawrence Family Jewish Community Center for Sofie Whitney and Brendan Duff, founders of the student-led March for Our Lives movement, sparked by the 2018 mass shooting at Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida.
It was my worst nightmare. It was everyone's worst nightmare.
Whitney survived the shooting that killed 17 of her classmates and teachers.
We knew that there was something that we had to do, and we needed to create some sort of positive change after something so traumatic.
That positive change led to the movement, along with this, a New York Times best-selling book written by Whitney, Duff, and 23 other survivors.
It's about how we can galvanize our peers and how it really takes a generation and focus to be able to create the change that we all want to see.
Duff and Whitney were on their way to San Diego when they heard the news about the most recent mass shooting in Virginia Beach.
It's horrifying and it's triggering and it's emotional, but at the same time, it's something that reminds all of us why we need to act with the urgency that this issue deserves.
There are now hundreds of March for Our Lives chapters across the country, including here in San Diego, working to increase voter registration and spread gun violence prevention and mental health services.
Our generation is really the generation being affected, so we really want to rise above it and be the voices of the movement.
Our work has inspired other kids, and just showing that we have the power to do this stuff and we can not only change minds but also save lives.
Justina Myers, Fox 5 News.
Chronicling the survival and aftermath of the 2018 Parkland shooting. 2 Stoneman Douglas High School alum are on a book tour in San Diego. 10 News reporter Rena Nakano met the students today and shows us how their fight against gun violence birthed the March for Our Lives.
The idea was born out of the most tragic moment of their lives, but these students say they want it to last more than a moment, and that's why they created a movement.
Valentine's Day 2018, a celebration of love. But for Sofie Whitney, it was anything but.
It was awful. It was just it was my worst nightmare. It was everyone's worst nightmare.
The senior at Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School was in drama class when a gunman committed the worst school shooting in U.S. history. 17 students and staff lost their lives.
It was unfair that so many people had experienced such loss and so many people had to experience such trauma, and that it wasn't abnormal.
Not abnormal then, not abnormal now.
We just need to collectively remind ourselves that this is a uniquely American problem, so we need to address this as Americans, not as one side of the political spectrum or the other.
Brendan Duff had graduated from the school a year prior. The college communications student immediately flew home and became the spokesperson for March for Our Lives.
How our crazy, messed up minds somehow led to this incredible movement forming from just a bunch of kids.
Months passed and the media attention faded. The next stage was their book, Glimmer of Hope.
With the book, we had a lot more time to, streamline our process and figure out what we wanted to include and how we wanted to tell our story.
Stories of survivors and stories of victims.
It doesn't just stop when the tragedy is over. It doesn't just stop when the trigger's pulled. This is something that we take with us, and so we take them physically with us, too.
Audience members, moved by the two, went home with a signed copy of the New York Times bestseller.
We can't let this happen anymore. We can't have our children sacrificed. Yes, that's why I'm here.
Rena Nakano, 10 News.